have nothing to do with what I'm doing now, which is perfectly fine. Some political science and some English literature, and then had a chance to move up here to Maricopa County up in '99, which just makes it sound so ancient. And I was able to get my master's in public administration from Arizona State University, which I really enjoyed that experience, and I learned a lot. And I'm really, really fortunate for that time. So my work life, I have been very blessed, and I use that term very deliberately. That literally, one of my first jobs, as I was part of my MPA experience, was a management internship with the city of Tempe, and I've had the opportunity of being able to serve the community, to be a public servant, whether in the public space, like a local government space, or the nonprofit space, since 2003. And I'm really, really grateful to have that experience. I didn't know if I ever was going to have that experience, so it was just pretty amazing. And in that space, I have served a number of different roles within the nonprofit area, everything from some initial program management to doing some more of the administrative side, to fundraising, to grant writing, to reviewing grants, and everything in between. Throughout it all, I just, one constant, I've worked with volunteers. I like to say that without volunteers, we are pretty boring. We just really can't do any of the work that we're doing. And that's led me to my current role with the Valley Sun United Way, where I have the opportunity of leading some amazing teams that are doing much bigger work than I can possibly imagine, as specifically around our housing and homelessness work and our health work, which includes our food insecurity work for all of Maricopa County. So it's been just fantastic. And I do have to give a shout out and a recognition. There's a slide for the ASU Lodestar Center for Philanthropy. Yay, that's great. I've been an instructor with them since 2016. And actually, I started with the class of developing and engaging volunteers, which is nonprofit management M&I 104. A lot of the things are kind of inspired from there, as I had a chance to rewrite the curriculum from that. I also added some extra stuff in there to this particular little talk, so it's not exactly the same thing, but a little plug, if you want to ever take a little course, you're welcome to sign on. The instructors are amazing, and it's all practitioners in the field. I took a lot of those courses, and I learned a lot. And I'm very biased, but I think it's a pretty great course and some really great instructors. So all that's a little bit about myself. I always like to say and kind of center, like, well, that's great, Jason, but why are we here today? Like, why should we care about this topic for the now? I think that, a lot of folks, have really engaged with me around this topic, and especially in this past year. And I am a self-admitted nerd in these kind of topics, and so I like to geek out on these particular things. My partner is a kindergarten teacher, and we have a lot of conversations about, how are people going to engage back into the space, and especially during this historic moment. And really, just, really letting that really sink in, that, we're living through a historic moment, and which there really isn't a playbook for a lot of the things that we've been going through in this past year. And that's okay, right? And in that kind of historic moment, there are levels of stress and anxiety and trauma that we're all going through, some much, much, much worse than ours, not only from individuals that may have lost their jobs, not only through those individuals that have had a loved one maybe get sick, or have a loved one that's maybe unfortunately passed away. There's a lot of individuals, especially their Black and Brown individuals, that have had an incredibly hard year. They've had a lot of hard years since then, but again, it's been a big time, right? And this idea of being able to, we're going through this big historic moment. And at this time, a lot of the healing that we would naturally do is by congregating, being with others, and trying to give back. And for a lot of those systems, it's shrunk or it's shut down entirely. And so that's been really hard for folks, where like how, some things have transferred over online, but, I would always see like the volunteer space as that, when there's a lot of things that are out of control in my life, I went and volunteered to feel like I can channel, like I can kind of turn off my brain and just channel my hands, my labor, and to do something to help someone else. Right. And in some cases, just kind of not even think, right. And just like, not like let someone else tell me something to do, right? And we've kind of lost some of that, right? My belief is that there's going to be a pent-up demand for this. Okay, I feel that once it's starting to get safe, and we're starting to hear some of these things, I'm sure all of you are starting to hear some of these things, where there's individuals that are just like, all right, I'm getting my, literally I get phone calls where like I'm getting my second dose of the vaccine. And after about 3-4 weeks, what's happening? What can I do like this summer? Right. And we're like, okay, people want to start doing some stuff. Okay. Even those same kind of polls, we've been doing the same kind of polls where again, we're starting to see the same thing. Like over half of folks are feeling more comfortable being around other people. Right. So it's a really critical time to be thinking about and rethinking, but even just kind of challenging ourselves a little bit on what this stuff works. And also acknowledging that while we've gone through this historic period and we're going through this historic period, for us to not lose perspective and to actually gauge and test our own systems in this historic period to make sure that we're not caught, in a difficult situation again. Okay, because while this has been the first time we've had a global pandemic of this size for maybe 100 years, for some of our amazing brothers and sisters in the volunteer state, they go through these crises every hurricane season. Okay, some of our brothers and sisters in the volunteer space, they go through this every wildfire season. Okay, this, if we reframe this as just crisis management and some of those emergency things, to where sometimes there's a natural disaster, sometimes there's something else that's going on, to where we don't have access to volunteers. I have worked actually with some members of the faith community, and sometimes just for the members that have a chance to go off and volunteer, sometimes they just can't, right? But they're the core members. So again, we think a little bit different, and that's why I'm hoping today we can have this a different perspective to arm us for the next, not only be prepared for the next, whatever crisis that is, but also to be ready to welcome those volunteers back in, to welcome in that healing and move from there. So that is my introduction. Hopefully we'll spend the next kind of like 40 minutes or so going from there. So section 1, as you may have saw, was we're going to really begin with the moment that we're in, which is evaluating the capacity of organization to work with volunteers, and very specifically during a crisis. Okay, so again, we're going to go kind of fast and kind of high level, and a lot of this is going to be kind of like, yeah, Jason, of course we're going to do that kind of stuff. But I'm surprised by the kind of conversations I've had with folks, especially within the nonprofit space. I'm assuming it's not just Maricopa County here, but I've heard across the state and across the region and even across the country, where a lot of folks, they didn't have a plan, right? They didn't have, all of a sudden, like things shut down in March 2020, and they didn't have a plan for what happened for April 2020. Okay, so this is an opportunity of looking at the assessment, or as I like to refer to, it's just a series of questions, right? Is this a way to just kind of be thinking to ourselves like, all right, so we're going through this, right? How can we like ask the right questions, develop some questions to where we can kind of think about our agency, our programs, the work itself, and the systems we have, to where we'll be ready the next time, right? We can learn from this opportunity. I'm hoping a lot of you have already begun a version of this kind of assessment for your volunteer programs as well as your work, but also be thinking like, what else? What else did we not think about? So one point and one kind of question is that volunteers have been responding to emergencies for generations, right? They're the ones that step up, right? There's the old story. I mean, so again, I'm going to date myself, but when I was down in Tucson, I think it was 1980. It was one of the 100-year floods. Okay, and as a child, and hopefully I'm seeing some nods. Some folks are just in the same age bracket or closer to my age bracket than others. I remember watching those rivers, those washes run like raging rivers. All right. And I remember even as a small child, I think I was like 4 or 3 years old. I remember watching people fill up sandbags, okay, to make sure that people's homes weren't flooding or to minimize that, okay? Volunteers have been responding to emergencies for generations, okay? And they have been, but it's just a little bit different now, right? For some folks, it hasn't been safe to congregate in areas, right? So then maybe they've shifted online. Knowing that there's always going to be that interest, great. Now we need to be thinking differently. Like if there's always going to be that kind of demand, what else can we do to kind of assess our organization and our work? So we start asking ourselves, like, what makes this crisis different than other crises? Okay. And that could be around, is it safe for people to actually congregate together? Is it safe for people to be outside? And again, we're thinking the COVID-19 pandemic, but that could relate to other things like a hurricane, for example, right? Hurricane comes through and there's a bunch of damage. Gosh, maybe that's not safe for people to be out there kind of literally sticking their hands into debris, right? They might get hurt, okay? Thinking about as this crisis is happening, what makes this crisis different? We can actually even begin to think about what are those potential crises that might even happen within Tucson, right? Or within Arizona. It may not be hurricanes, but it might be something else that makes really sense for us. When thinking about that crisis, then closely consider the work of your organization, okay? Think about that work. Do you need volunteers, right? In some cases, volunteers are a nice to have, right? For other organizations, and I have an experience in regional food banking where like most of our staff time was really covered by volunteers. It was hard. Like I can go through here and gosh, if we couldn't use volunteers, what would we do, right? We maybe couldn't be able to sort food. We couldn't maybe to build those food boxes, right? Again, thinking about your work and asking a question like, thinking about that mission-driven work that you're doing, does it have to be done by volunteers or not? And it really helps you assess, do we need them? And then ask that next question, is it safe to host those volunteers, right? Safe for your building, safe for your staff. Thinking to yourself, you never want to put those volunteers in harm. It's not just about having a positive volunteer experience. We really want to make sure that they are safe and they are happy. Then ultimately, once you have some of this assessments and even some other questions that you're probably starting to think about right now, how are you communicating this information to those volunteers, right? If you have a bunch of volunteers that are not tech savvy, don't send them a bunch of emails. Don't have them go to the website. Okay. And again, this is normal kind of stuff. But I mean, early in the pandemic, I was hearing from some of my colleagues, they're like, that's great. We're just going to send everything online. I'm like, not everyone has has internet, coverage. Not everyone has a camera that's reliable. Some folks don't even feel comfortable being on the camera regardless, right? So like making sure how are you communicating it and is it most effective? And it's an opportunity to have the answers of those questions above and communicate that with your volunteers, right? Letting them know that the work is still happening, but we don't need them right now because we want them to stay safe, okay? Use some opportunities. And those kinds of examples, that could be like, what is your process to continuously keep this information up to date and standardize it in some of your policies and some of your procedures, okay? Because what I've learned, and I don't know about you, but like now everyone has video cameras and but it wasn't this the case like 18 months ago, okay? Everyone had these things. Remember when the only video camera was like the thing that was on your phone, right? But no one used it. At least that was always my case. Now everyone's online, right? And it's a different idea. So technology is going to change. Our relationship to each other is going to change. And there's always be thinking to yourself, what is our process to keep this information up to date? Because you don't want to be back-footed on that next crisis. So moving on, for our second section, we're going to be looking at volunteer management and specifically really thinking about your role and the work. Okay, so I'm a big believer that, when we think about volunteer management, it really starts to begin with us. Okay, and I know, like, I had that question, like, I thought we were talking about volunteers. Why are we talking about us all of a sudden? Well, like, who's managing those volunteers? Okay, and a lot of folks that I've run into that have managed a lot of volunteers for lots of years, I'll ask them some very simple questions like, all right, so when you think about volunteer management, like, is that a management job or is that a leadership job? And they're like, I don't know, like, it's just us about, we're just trying to build the food boxes, right? We're just trying to, get the work done, okay? And that's fine, but I think that it's an opportunity for us to be thinking about broadly about your own particular leadership style, because it's those volunteers that are going to digest, they're going to see you in that leadership style. That's going to reflect your communication. That's going to reflect your organization and even how you process information. And so there's an opportunity to just really think inward about your leadership style and how that can influence those volunteers, right? And our volunteer managers, they are that ambassador of your entire organization and its mission to these individuals, right? That impression, it matters, right? And so there's just an opportunity for us to just think inward and thinking about some questions around considering the difference between management and leadership and how that influences your communication to your volunteers, right? One example in that is that you'll have going back to like a food bank. A lot of that really it's more of a straightforward kind of like a almost like an assembly line, right? It's literally an assembly line. And in that, the communication is really like you do step A, step B, step C, all that kind of stuff like that, right? And you're within a working warehouse in most cases, and you want to be safe and make sure people don't get ran over by something. So the communication style has to be very clear. It's really kind of a step-by-step, almost kind of like a micromanagement kind of way, because again, we want to keep people safe as well as have a good experience. But if you're working with a board member, if you're, and board members are volunteers too, as we all know, like, you don't just want to go to a board member and say, all right, this is what's going to happen. First, you're going to do this. Second, you're going to do this. They're going to be like, aren't I like your boss's boss? And like, you're kind of talking to me like this? Like, that seems kind of like weird. That's going to have to be more of a collaborative kind of like environment. You're going to change your communication style. One thing that I like to use is I'm a big fan of those like personality tests and like Myers-Briggs and DISCs and all of that kind of great stuff like that. Understanding like where your natural style is, like, are you just kind of a get done kind of person, where you're just going to get that stuff done and that's going to be great and that's perfect? Are you more of a sit back and listen, kind of process that kind of information? That's great too. But there's not one set style to manage volunteers. It's any manager of any style can manage those volunteers, but knowing more about yourself will help you better design those kinds of volunteer programs and systems so the volunteers can hear you better and respond to that better. And that's going to help them with that retention. Moving on. So another tool is the BART. Okay. I love the BART. I think the BART's just fun to say anyways. It's kind of a fun little thing. But the BART tool is a way of organizing yourself in relationship to the work, okay? And especially in helping to design not only where you are, but actually helping to design the actual volunteer experience by itself, okay? BART is an acronym. It stands for Boundary, Authority, Role, and Task. It has a lot of different applications. I've seen it used in facilitation. I've seen it used in a lot of coalition work. But where I've also seen it is around working with volunteers and specifically designing volunteer activities. Think about it as a way of like helping to explain and set expectations to volunteers of the day of the assignment, okay? That's where you, and again, and now we kind of put that frame, like, oh, we do that stuff all the time. You talk about the boundaries, like show up at 4 o'clock, not just show up when you want, right? Show up at 4 o'clock. It's going to be 60 minutes. We're going to have water. Make sure to bring sunscreen and a hat, okay? You're setting the boundaries for that experience, okay? If you don't have those boundaries, it's going to be a little willy-nilly, right? It's just going to be just a little different. Thinking about authority, who is the decision maker? Who's the authority for that particular activity? Who's in charge, right? Do you have the volunteer manager as kind of like the captain? Do you have smaller little teams? Maybe you're doing like a neighborhood beautification to where you're literally spread out all over the place, okay? Is that, did someone grant you that authority, or did you decide that? Okay, or are you working with community members, right? There's lots of different ways, but again, establishing like who's in charge and how, who's like the decision maker around there, it's helpful, because maybe something like we ran out of water, who's going to get more water, okay? Or like, heaven forbid, someone dropped a brick on their foot, what happens? Like, again, just thinking about that authority and establishing of like, hey, everyone, I'm the volunteer coordinator. I'm going to be here to make sure that everything goes well for you. If you have any questions, come to me, okay? Then you can think about the role, and not just the role for yourself. Again, some of it is like, you might be in charge, you might be the organizer, or maybe it's the role for the volunteer as well. Setting those roles or setting those expectations is something I like to say time and time again, and making sure that you're moving from like an implied space to an explicit space, okay? There's sometimes we work with volunteers and we just like, oh yeah, they know what we're doing, right? They know who's in charge. Don't make any assumptions. I think my grandmother had an expression about assumptions. So I won't say it in public, but my grandmother had some very colorful language. I'll just say that. So anyways, it's again making sure that those roles are clearly defined. And the final thing is that, what's the task? What are we here to do? We're gonna show up at 8 o'clock. We're gonna do A, B, and C. Okay, making sure we understand those tasks. And again, as we design it, if you use the BART tool, you're going to be able to clearly communicate and set those expectations for a successful event. Moving on. So our next section is around those volunteer opportunities. They begin by understanding why they volunteer. This is stuff that I think all of you are probably very comfortable with, and you're probably you understand a lot. This idea of like why people volunteer. This is pretty common. Probably a different, perspective I like to introduce is not only building upon like folks that are interested in building a skill, the affiliation, the external affiliation with incentives, like just that social aspects. These things are pretty common, but I also like to layer on to the, thinking differently about short-term volunteers and long-term volunteer opportunities, and making sure that we apply some of those other tools and expectations from the BART, and even some of these opportunities around thinking a little bit more critically about how those individuals can be developed to where maybe they're going to get a better level of experience. And I also like to always draw the line that, like, to me, and this is a little bit of my fundraising experience that kind of pops in my head, to me, all volunteers are donors. They're donating their time, okay? But sometimes we don't do a good job of cultivating those donors to turn into major givers, okay? Sometimes we don't take a short-term volunteer and turn them into a long-term volunteer opportunity, okay? We just hope they show up a bunch of times, right? There's an opportunity of us to be able to think about, like, all right, so maybe we have this short-term volunteer opportunity where we're working with a corporate group, and maybe they're going to come out and they're going to paint a fence. It's going to take an hour and a half. Great, okay? What kind of system do we have in place that not only helps to gauge their individual motivation, but also gets them for a longer-term relationship to that cause, okay? I mean, think about it. What kind of systems do you have in place, right? Maybe you have the systems down, maybe you don't, okay? But that's the kind of opportunity we have, because those long-term volunteers, not only will they're going to be satisfied, I mean, hopefully they're satisfied, they keep coming back, right? But they're also going to have a deeper relationship to the mission, to the work. They're going to be out there telling everyone how amazing this program is, right? They're going to be some of your best recruiters and say, like, you know what I do? Oh my gosh, I've done it like 2 or 3 times. Come with me and let's go volunteer together. Okay. So rethink around this idea of volunteer motivation and what gets people to show up, but kind of reframe it in the eyes of like, well, how can we grow and work with these individuals, right? How can we move from a short-term transactional experience? You come in and help us to do this work because then we don't have to pay staff. And I know now it's not what we say, but that's sometimes that's some of the things we need. That's perfect. It's honest. And they understand it too. It's really fine. But moving from a transactional experience to a transformational experience, to where they not only want to come back, but they know that by volunteering, they're helping with your core mission, right? It is the exact same principle around growing financial donors as well. Something for us to be thinking about, okay? Move on. I'm looking at our time check. Doing okay, but I want to make sure we have some time for some questions here. Our last section is as we kind of build upon some of those kind of questions and ideas that came here. Now, is there an idea for us to begin to update maybe some of those existing systems that we have to better recruit and to keep those volunteers coming back? Okay, so some of those tools, and again, some of these things we understand, but I want to kind of reframe them from a different perspective. Okay, one is, how many folks, have a volunteer job description? I want to, if you have it, raise your hand or do one of these things or whatever like that so I can see you. Great. I see a couple folks. Great. Very simple. Great. Awesome. Good for you. Okay. Second question is, when's the last time you've updated your volunteer job description? All right. Some of us update it every year. We have a system, we have a mechanism to update that to make sure it's still fresh. Okay. I hear some colleagues that they haven't updated in multiple years. Okay. And I don't know if anyone's known this, but the world has changed a little bit in the last 13 months. Okay. There's an opportunity for us to keep these job descriptions fresh, to keep them relevant, and make sure that folks are just looking at them. One way to be able to update this, and maybe some of you are doing this, I think probably you are, but like, I love to be able to take a volunteer job description and then go up to one of my long-term volunteers and ask them like, would you respond to this? All right. And in some of them are like, oh yeah, that's great. Others like, no way, I don't even know what that is. Like, so you can engage your volunteers as a wonderful focus group. It's actually a really nice house. It's honoring like, you're amazing and thank you so much. Could you help us bring in more awesome folks like you? Okay, that is an opportunity for us. Another tool for a better volunteer retention system and agreement system is, what kind of training opportunities do you have for your volunteers right now? A lot of us think about our staff and those training and development opportunities, and we need those. They're very important. But what do we have to train and grow these long-time volunteers? Okay, I know some folks, I've worked with folks that they have been volunteering like 20, 25 years with an organization. All right. And if we haven't had the conversation with that individual that's been donating for decades, and I said donating very purposely, donating to us for decades, and we haven't asked them like, hey, we have this like this nonprofit like effectiveness conference that costs like $28. How would we like pay for you to attend? Our pleasure. All right. Oh my gosh. They might like be like, oh my gosh, like the group that I volunteer with, they are investing in me. They actually took the time to reach out to me. And from your perspective, it's $28, right? It's not, and again, we think about this for our board members, but sometimes we don't think about this for other long-term volunteers. Okay. And just because a board member is leadership It doesn't mean that those other volunteers aren't leaders, okay? It's a way of rethinking about, and again, that's another way could just be like literally sitting down with your longtime volunteers, and especially those volunteers that have like, they've come back maybe, gosh, three or four or five times, okay? To me, if a volunteer comes back, 3 or 5 times, they like you, right? And so it's time to maybe get to know them a little bit more, okay? Carving out some time, asking them, that's a conversation. Why are you here? Like what, I've seen you around, I know your first name, I know your last name, I know your contact information because we have it in the database. But beyond that, like, like why this issue than any other issue? Like there's so many nonprofits, but you keep picking us. Like, why is that? Right? Tell me more, right? Those kind of conversations are not only very nice, because now we're shifting from just like a number or some vagueness to something like a human to human interaction, which also aligns with some of those motivational components that's over there. But then you can also create and understand, like, what does success look like to these individuals? Maybe it's literally just to like come in, build something and leave, and that's it. That's perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much. If you need anything, I just really want to appreciate you. But then you also get to know them a little bit further, to where when we get into gratitude, you actually have a better understanding of what gratitude looks like for that person. Okay. Then they're going to feel really special. They're going to be like, wow, someone took the time to have a conversation with me and get to know who I am. And, they didn't just do a handwritten note, they actually referenced something, right? They made it special. It wasn't that form letter, right? And I write tons of handwritten notes, but again, like I have a lot of ways to say thank you for volunteering, but it's kind of like the same 6 or so kind of expressions I keep kind of using over and over again. Again, some of you might have more, but like I try to be creative, but like it's better to have like a personalized, like, wow, thank you so much. I was so inspired by your story, and you reinvigorated my, my dedication to this mission. Like there's a lot you can do, but you have more material if you have the conversation. Okay. And it also allows you to create better systems to train them to, or at least to know what reinvesting into your volunteer program looks like, or retention looks like. Okay. And if you have conversations with, maybe you pick 10 of your longtime volunteers, and they're all saying like, it'd be really great if we had a better check-in system, or we had a better like way to get in the building, or our parking situation, whatever like that. That's amazing data. You can actually use that data to make a better volunteer experience because you asked them. Okay. And you can quantify it. You can put it into something that then, whether it's a new training system or an enhancement, you can do that. And all of these are expressions of gratitude. These are ways you're taking that time to get to know them. And that gratitude is a form of recognition. It is a demonstration of love. It is an opportunity for us to shift from like this kind of like transactional mindset. We're just like, oh my gosh, I know there's like 50 of you right now, and I'm just trying to make sure everyone has a bagel, and like, and it's just like everyone is just like, it's just a big, like day of, mess. And we've all been there. Okay. We've all been there, and we will continue to do that because that's just part of volunteer stuff. And that's part of the joy and part of the fun that kind of goes with that controlled chaos. And I love it. Right. But taking the time to get to know those individuals, it simplifies it. Okay. And then we can think about like, wow, like, I have some volunteers that they don't want a handwritten note. They're going to complain about the cost of the stamp, right? And that's fine, right? But you can pick up the phone, right? You can have, instead of the big, massive volunteer, kind of gala, kind of thing. And some people love that. Some people love to be put on a stage and like have a spotlight on them, right? Some people hate it, okay? And it's really good to have the conversation with that person to know the difference between like, this person, we need to give them a giant trophy and a big old, like a big like video PowerPoint, and they're going to love it. And if we do that for this other person, we'll never see that volunteer ever again. Okay. Having those conversations allows us to practice better gratitude. And that's going to keep them coming back. Okay. So in closing, it is 4:30. I was impressed. I was able to talk very quickly. My partner just came in and just gave me a look, and she's probably going to say like, "Wow, you're talking really fast." I'm like, "Yeah, it's very true." Usually, I can go on for days, but I don't want to bore anyone. So, in closing, I really hope that what you saw today, what you heard today, they were just different perspectives. And again, I honor the fact that so many of you, you're doing it. You're experts in the field. I can learn from you. We can learn from each other. But I hope that this is not just some different questions, right? And just remember that we have such an amazing opportunity right now, because the folks that we have created these volunteer experiences, they need us, right? They need us to be there when we come, when it's safe for us to come back together. That's going to be helpful for our healing. That's going to be helpful for not only that personal healing for those volunteers, for us to heal as a community. And with that, was me talking really fast. I'm going to be quiet. We're going to shift over to Q&A. I'm going to take us off stop share, because I like to do the gallery view so I can see more of you, as opposed to just a giant orange box or something like that. And again, if anyone has any questions, I know that was fast, but please just unmute yourself. Jessica, it's good to see you again. Or just put it in the chat box, and please, I'm all ears.
I had a quick question, or maybe it's not quick, but
yeah.
So I never heard of the BART system, that Boundary Authority Role Task, before, yeah. But I love a good acronym. And yeah. One of the questions that I was thinking about was, I love clear boundaries. I think they're very important and very critical for healthy communication, and also like a clear sense of authority, like between volunteer and volunteer, kind of manager, supervisor, coordinator, whatever. But sometimes I feel like nonprofits are often dynamic, and there's a lot of transition that happens with volunteer coordinators or norms or things that change as people come in and out of those positions. And so where I'm going with this is, do you have any suggestions as to kind of how to reestablish boundaries and norms and of like authority? Fit, like, I'm the coordinator, you're the volunteer serving, donating time with us, but like the way you spoke to me is not appropriate, or these are the reasons why I'm communicating to you over email this way, because like, I know it wasn't done that way before, but like, anyways, do you have any suggestions on how to navigate reestablishing those boundaries and norms with volunteers who have probably been there far longer than you have in your position?
I do. It's an important question, and it happens a lot. Okay, and whether it's a member of your board, that's usually, I've heard that example a lot. I've also heard like longtime, like former staff members or people who started the organization and now they're volunteers, and you're like, whew, like it's like your name is literally on the building. Like, oh my gosh, like that's amazing. Like, and that's incredible. And it also happens a lot within the faith community. Okay, and so like, especially with those kind of volunteers, I believe I'm a strong believer in more communication, the better, and especially honest conversation. And if you're having, like, to me, that is a coaching session. Okay, and by taking that individual, scheduling private time, you don't want to make a person look bad in public, because people are going to get defensive and it's going to be weird. But like, and just honestly, just truly like laying it all out there, okay, by saying like, okay, this is like what I see. This is from what I see, this is how I'm feeling about this, and this is how I want to react to that. And which may be maybe like maybe meaner or maybe more constrictive, and really put like really share that with that individual and ask them to respond to it. Okay, and really, you're really acknowledging and putting yourself out there, but you're also making the expectation that they should be doing the same thing too. Okay, once that should clear the air a little bit. Okay, at least it gets it all out on the table. And I would say 9 times out of 10, it's just miscommunication. It's just like, oh, I wasn't even thinking about that. Then you're good, right? And then you clear the air. If there is something else that's there, then you can shift to more of a coaching thing of like, so what I see you doing is blank. What I need you to do is blank. So how can we work together to change that behavior to get you to over here? Okay. And if those two things don't work and it's still happening, I'm still a big believer that you can still fire volunteers. Okay. And that's even, you can also fire donors. Okay. And that always freaks people out. But at the same time, if those volunteers and donors are literally hurting the mission of your organization, okay, then you have to ask yourself, then why are you working with them? Okay. If it's just the money, then just take their money and go. Okay. But like, it's just, or not. So it's a bigger relationship. Okay. Thinking about the long haul. Great question. Other questions or comments? I see in the chat box, Martha had, she loved the last part about the importance of gratitude. Yeah, I'm a big fan of gratitude as well. So it's what keeps me coming back. I don't know about all of you for volunteer stuff. So other comments, other questions?
I have another question.
Yeah, Alex, the floor is yours. Or we're just going to stay in uncomfortable silence, and I could do that for years. So yeah.
I liked you talked about the importance of missional work and like kind of, and maybe weaving that in with gratitude and things, but I'm just curious, maybe this is like a more of an open discussion or question, but what are some tools or ways that you or other people here or whatever, we've kind of thanking volunteers and reminding them of why they're like, what the mission of their service is, aside from just like a direct, like the thing that comes to my mind is sending an email saying, thank you for your service, for helping us feed the hungry today at the community food bank, right? That's kind of an obvious thing, but do you have any suggestions or the ways of weaving that kind of missional impact into communication and development with volunteers?
Yeah, I do. And I think actually one of the learnings out of the COVID pandemic, and especially more video work, is that it's really easy to record stuff now. Okay. Like, remember, like when it'd be like, hey, let's like record a video, and people were like, oh my gosh, we don't have the technology or whatever like that. Now we can all do it. We can literally record a PowerPoint or like record a Q&A or whatever like that, like on a Zoom session, and have that link available. And from that, what we have been practicing, and we're still testing it because again, it's still really new to us, is deliberate onboarding and deliberate offboarding. Okay. And sometimes that onboarding, like the day before or a week before a project, is just like, hey, it's really a way of like establishing your BART, right? And also like reminding them like, this is who we are. And your boss may have told you that you had to do this volunteering thing. And so, but this is the context for said volunteering thing, right? And this is who we are, okay? Very brief, stick it into like a 5 to 10 minutes tops. If it's like 3 hours long, no one's gonna watch it. But like, and no one cares. Like you're being long-winded, okay? Like just being honest, and I'm calling myself out on that. So like 5 to 10 minutes, really, really tight, okay? Then follow up with almost the exact same thing with a different version that includes that thank you, okay? This is what you did, okay? Some of you may have done like public speaking, and there's that whole thing of like, you tell them what you're gonna say, you say it, and you tell them what they said, right? Like it's a version of that, but it's a way of centering around like say the mission, the client, and really make it less about like the activity and more about the impact. Okay. And sometimes that's hard because like, again, for some folks, like, especially with like some of these corporate volunteer things, they're just trying to get by. Okay. And all of a sudden, like, instead of going to work that day, they have to go to this other thing and they're told to wear boots or something. And there's like, and so like, let's work with them, right? Then I also think on the back end, that's also an opportunity to ask, like, if you personally want to stay in contact with us to learn more about this work we're doing, here's how, right? And then that's a way of also getting personal contact information and making it more of a personalized experience to grow that volunteer from there. And at the bare minimum, you've set some context. Other questions or comments?
You know, I'm thinking about what you were saying about the pent up demand.
Yeah.
And so right now, I feel like I've got some volunteers that aren't that active, and and they're long-term volunteers, but they're not that active because of COVID. But I'm thinking that boy, if I can get them to move towards recruiting other volunteers, then that might use some of their valuable time, their energy, their experience. Do you have any kind of but it's a jump, right? It's a jump for them, and I'm just kind of wondering. I'm not really sure how to preface that conversation. Any thoughts?
My initial thought with that, and Pat, I think that having those be really just honest, like, conversations about it's an uncomfortable space, and that I think that's we're all thinking it, right? You don't have to have all the answers, and I think that's like demonstrating or continuing to demonstrate that humility and just understanding, like, we're just figuring it out here, okay? Like, very few of us have gone through like a pandemic of this scale in our lifetime, okay? So we're all just figuring it out, okay? So there might be some ways, like, the first thing that popped in my mind is, like, having like a targeted focus group, or almost like a like, whether it's a happy hour, but the purpose is with those volunteers for a purposeful conversation around this topic. Okay.
Can I ask you to, I lost you for about 30 seconds, 45 seconds. All of a sudden you were silent. Can you say it again?
Yeah. An idea is having a purposeful focus group or conversation around this topic. Okay. And I think that that's a way of engaging them. It's a way of asking them questions, but it's also some way of hearing some of their fears and some of their solutions. Okay. And at the bare minimum, you're going to maintain communication. There might be a space where you can actually co-create a solution that wins for everybody. Okay. But it just lean into the uncomfortableness and have the conversation. I think that there's not a downside to that.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
You're welcome. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Linda.
Our organization serves primarily seniors and people with disabilities, and we're a pretty small organization. I had volunteers coming out of the woodwork at the beginning of the pandemic, and I had nothing for them to do because most of our clients don't have any technical ability to go online. So we weren't able to move our services online. And many of our services are very face-to-face, transportation to medical appointments and that type of thing. So our demand has not really picked up very much yet. We are getting people vaccinated and everything, but I still have this glut of volunteers who are looking, they're just kind of chumming the waters, looking for things to do. And I haven't been able to find really meaningful ways to keep them engaged because we just don't have anything right now. So I'm afraid that the attrition rate is going to be pretty high. Plus we're going into summer, which is one of our downtimes anyway, because so many of our volunteers are just seasonal. So any ideas how I can engage people? Or, I mean, we've stepped up. We're doing monthly Zoom volunteer meetings, which we never did before. And I'm trying to stay engaged with them that way, but again, I'm working with an older volunteer coalition as well. So not all of them are completely tech savvy either. So anything you could say would be great.
Yeah, and Linda, thank you so much for. I think that what you're doing that makes a lot of sense, and I think that again, this it kind of piggybacks on what we were chatting with Pat about is like, it's okay to lead with we don't have all the answers, and lead with a lot of humility and really almost in a way kind of ask for some grace, right? Because we're all going through it, right? And I think the communication, the Zoom is great. And again, you also have to meet your volunteers where they are, right? And so like if not everyone's really like savvy with Zoom, it's always gonna be hard. Sometimes the good old fashioned printed and mailed newsletter is actually gonna be really effective. And it's finding those kind of communication tools to keep them informed of the work that's happening, the need that still exists, and the continued appreciation for their service, and let them know when we can, we're going to welcome you back with open arms. Okay. That's probably the most consistent thing I've seen for a lot of and other similar kind of groups. As we work with a lot of groups that work with seasonal volunteers as well up here. And they're the same kind of boat, but at least they can at least maintain that communication and keep them abreast of what's going on. Okay. And knowing that you're going to lose some folks, but you're going to lose some folks anyways. There's always like a natural attrition. And that's okay. All right. But at least you're keeping them informed. Okay. You didn't just like disappear, right? You just be like, oh my gosh, well, you're not here. And since you're not here, I'm not going to tell you what's going on. Okay. That I think is a nice way. And there's also some creative ways too. I've seen folks that have literally created like little like Facebook like groups for their volunteers. And they'll do their little recording on their phone. Like those like record themselves as a little bit of an update. I've also seen some folks like will like walk and talk, like some folks that do like community gardens, and they'll show themselves and be like, look at all this cool stuff that we're going. And the plants miss you. Like we just like, oh my gosh, like we really wish you were here to take care of these gardens because there's a lot of gardens, and like little things like that. And I think that could be those are just other creative ways to keep them interested, but also knowing that they're appreciated.
I thank you. I do say that our board has been mindful of the fact that we need to keep ourselves in the forefront of our constituents' minds. And so they formed a marketing and development committee, and we send out emails to vast numbers of people twice a month and try to keep it relevant. So I see that as a positive thing from the pandemic, because we really didn't have that presence before. So I think, in that way, it's kind of stretched us and helped us to communicate better. So that's great.
That's good. I will say one thing that's just a little bit of a caution, and every group is going to be a little bit different, but at least for us, our folks are surveyed to death right now. Okay. Yeah. So just be a little mindful on those surveys. Yeah. Not as much as, again, my partner's kindergarten class, like they're really like all education folks are like really, really surveyed. But just like, let's be mindful that like you might literally be the 4th survey they got today. Okay.
Right. Well, we're not sending surveys so much. We're doing just emails, informational emails. So
yeah, and that's more something for everybody. But that's more of a lesson from us that we learn. So
good idea. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other comments or questions? Well, hearing none, I'm just going to say thank you again. Really, really appreciate you. I'm going to turn it over to our host again. I'm going to put my email address in the chat box, so like y'all can write it down or whatever like that. And it's, if anyone, I'm very serious, has a question, something tomorrow or whatever, please feel free to reach out. Or you can do social media stuff like LinkedIn or whatever works for you. I don't really care. Just make sure that, if you have those questions, please, please, please reach out. I love this stuff. I love to be a resource. And if you have some great like innovations or some best practices as well, gosh, share those too. Like that's just, I love that. Those are fun messages. I love to see that stuff, you know. So yeah, there's Andrea. Yeah.
Hi. I was trying to unmute myself, but I got a really old computer. Anyway, I just wanted to say I've done cumulatively about 10 years of volunteer program management, and this was one of the best programs I've been able to attend. Very, very good. I appreciate your inclusiveness and talking about people who have it so much harder, and using your pronouns and just tips, really great tips that I hadn't heard before. I thought I had heard, well, I have heard a lot. So thank you.
That means a lot. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Well, thank you so much, Jason. This has been fantastic. So happy that you were able to join our group today and share such a wealth of knowledge. So very much appreciate that.
It is my pleasure. And again, thank you all so much for continuing to fellowship with each other and to continue to learn with each other. It's a really big deal. I just want to just acknowledge that, like, that's really important. And just that, like I said, like part of me is like, you know, when I started in this field, it would have been really cool to have like a bunch of people that I can actually like talk to about this kind of stuff and learn things. And kind of, but I'm so grateful that this exists, because it's just going to make not only your experience and to better, but that is then going to translate to better experiences for the volunteers in the work. So I just hats off, and y'all are amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. We'll send a post-event email with a survey about evaluating how this program was. So please take the time to fill that out if you have the time. And we hope to see you next month at our next program.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jason.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.